Mr. Speaker, can I remind the Prime Minister of the Nolan Principles, which are meant to govern the behaviour of those in public office? They're these: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. Instead, what do we get from this Prime Minister and this Conservative government? Dodgy contracts, jobs for their mates, and cash for access. And who's at the heart of it? The Prime Minister, Major Sleaze, sitting there.
It's not surprising that the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and his cabinet colleagues have found themselves mired into serious charges of sleaze and impropriety just weeks after forming the government. These are no longer allegations, From Keir Starmer to Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, from Chancellor Rachel Reeves to Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, all have confessed to accepting huge financial favours from dodgy donor, namely Lord Wahid Ali. I will take you through those allegations individually and how these shameless politicians have reacted. But let's first hear Starmer to understand what he has historically thought of impropriety in public life, such as accepting huge financial favours from dodgy donors. This was Starmer on 28th of April 2021 at the peak of the second wave of coronavirus pandemic, giving grief to the then PM Boris Johnson on accepting financial favours to refurbish his flat.
Mr. Speaker, normally when people don't want to incriminate themselves, they go no comment. Let me ask this. Let's explore this a bit further, Prime Minister. Let's ask it a different way. Either, this is the initial invoice, Prime Minister, initial invoice, either the taxpayer paid the initial invoice, or it was the Conservative Party, or it was a private donor, or it was the Prime Minister. So I'm making it easy for the Prime Minister. It's now multiple choice. There are only 4 options. It should be easier than finding the chatty rat, Mr. Speaker. So I ask the Prime Minister again, who paid the initial invoice, Prime Minister, for the redecoration of the Prime Minister's flat, the initial invoice? Mr. Speaker, he talks of priorities. What's he spending his time doing? This is a Prime Minister who, during the pandemic, was nipping out of meetings to choose wallpaper at £840 a roll. Just last week, he spent his time phoning journalists to moan about his old friend Dominic Cummings. And he's telling the civil service to find out who paid for the redecoration of his flat. The Cabinet Secretary has been asked to investigate who paid for the refurbishments in the flat. Why doesn't the Prime Minister just tell him? That would be the end of the investigation. Mr. Speaker, it's been widely reported that Lord Brownlow, who just happens to have been given a peerage by the Conservative Party, was asked to donate £58,000 to help repay for the cost of this refurbishment. Can the Prime Minister, if he's so keen to answer, confirm, did Lord Brownlow make that payment for that purpose?
Yes, Starmer.
Answer the question. That's what the public scream at their televisions every PM Qs. Answer the question. The Prime Minister hasn't answered the question. He knows he hasn't answered the question. He never answers the question. The Prime Minister will be aware that he's required to declare any benefits that relate to his political activities, including loans or credit arrangements, within 28 days. 28 days, Prime Minister, yes. He will also know that any donation must be recorded in the register of ministers' interests, and that under the law, any donation of over £500 to a political party must be registered and declared. So the rules are very clear. The Electoral Commission now think that there are reasonable grounds to suspect that an offence or offences may have occurred. That's incredibly serious. Can the Prime Minister tell the House, does he believe that any rules or laws have been broken in relation to the refurbishment of the Prime Minister's flat? Mr. Speaker, can I remind the Prime Minister of the Nolan Principles, which are meant to govern the behaviour of those in public office? They're these: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. Instead, what do we get from this Prime Minister and this Conservative government? Dodgy contracts, jobs for their mates and cash for access. And who's at the heart of it? The Prime Minister, Major Sleaze, sitting there.
Now, Sim Starmer has been found to have accepted more than £100,000 worth cash favours from different donors. Labour peer Lord Wahid Ali even bought clothes for Keir Starmer's wife Victoria, worth £5,000. Starmer accepted work clothing donations worth £16,200 and multiple pairs of designer glasses to the value of £2,485. Starmer then accepted corporate hospitality from Arsenal Football Club on the ground that he can no longer use his normal season ticket as Prime Minister. So much for a politician who vowed to dedicate his tenure as PM to serve ordinary public. He also accepted 4 tickets worth £4,000 from the Premier League for a Taylor Swift concert where he was pictured alongside his wife. His ministers defended Starmer for accepting corporate hospitality worth hundreds of thousands of pounds from Arsenal Football Club for the entire duration of his term as the country's Prime Minister. I'm told that he is a football fan and therefore he needs to watch his favourite football club, which is Arsenal, week in and week out. But why must he be allowed to fulfill his insane desires by accepting hundreds of thousands of pounds worth free gifts? Also, why should he be openly supporting a particular club when he is the Prime Minister of the whole of the UK? He first said that he can't be accessible after 6 p.m. on Fridays because his Jewish wife has her weekly rituals and he must be present during those rituals. Then he is literally saying that he must continue to attend the football matches every week despite being the Prime Minister of this country. Hasn't anyone told him that these are the sacrifices you have to make after occupying the 10 Downing Street? Also, there are serious issues of quid pro quo on accepting gifts from Premier League, which he is expected to start regulating soon. Can you expect an impartial conduct from him? There is nothing called free lunch. If someone is splashing cash on you and hundreds of thousands of pounds, that individual or entity is expecting a favor from you. It's a common sense. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that. Should you be allowed to do that? Listen to this Tory politician on BBC's Question Time last week.
As well, Fiona, as transparency, we have a rule that if you are dealing with a regulatory issue that's coming up and is pertinent, you shouldn't be taking hospitality from them. And Lucy's just said tens of thousands of pounds from the Premier League for a Prime Minister who's about to start regulating, possibly, the Premier League. And she thinks you have to be in this kind of new Labour bubble to not see how wrong that is in principle.
Well, can
and
we
he
just...
was, and for Keir Starmer, and I think, forget the tickets, forget the frocks, forget the spectacles, the suits, and the access for Lord Ali. What really, I think, gets in people's craw, and I was knocking on doors in my constituency on Saturday, is the hypocrisy. The promise was, and the millions of people voted Labour, because they did buy that we needed a cleaner politics.
Also, if you have to look good in public, buy your own clothes. We all do that. We all do, even though we don't earn over £150,000 every year. And we don't have the luxury of enjoying 2 residences, all paid for. How cheap is that? You are shamelessly accepting clothes for your wife from Lord Ali and then giving him access pass to 10 Downing Street for him to hold a garden party there. All coincidences? Lord Ali was allegedly given the access pass to 10 Downing Street by former civil servant Sue Gray, who is currently working as the Chief of Staff at 10 Downing Street. It was her damning report into Boris Johnson's Partygate that brought his downfall and paved the way for Starmer to become the next PM. Gray resigned from civil service and joined the Labour Party. Her son, Liam Conlon, got a Labour Party ticket to contest and win in this year's parliamentary election in southeast London. Too many coincidences, isn't it? Listen to this grilling of a Labour cabinet minister.
Has Lord Ali ever donated to your wardrobe, your spectacles? Has he ever loaned you an apartment in London or New York?
Not everything that's been donated to me has been declared in line with the rules. What I would say about Lord Ali is that he's been a Labour peer for, I think, over 25 years.
Yes.
Donates to the Labour Party, to Labour politicians, because he wants a Labour government.
But he got a temporary Downing Street pass. From Sue Gray, we hear today, Labour Party have been very reluctant to say who sanctioned this pass. It was Sue Gray. That happened after he donated £10,000 to Liam Conlon's campaign. Liam Conlon is now the MP for Beckenham and Penge. He's also Sue Gray's son. There's something quite murky about that. I think if that arrangement had happened under a Tory government, ministers like you would be on the airwaves having a real go at the opposition about that.
I think you've got a Labour peer, a very, very long-standing Labour peer, who donates to Labour politicians, Labour candidates.
He donated to two campaigns, and one of them was Conlon's. No, he's Sue Gray's. In an election campaign, as far as just for the election campaign, he gives money to Sue Gray's son, and the next thing we know, he gets a Downing Street pass. You have to admit that looks a bit dodgy.
Can you see something murky here? A civil servant submits a damning report on a former PM. That report brings an end to his political career. That report also paves the way for Keir Starmer to become the next Prime Minister of this country. She then quits civil services and becomes the most powerful person in the new Labour government, earning more than even the PM. Her son manages to get a Labour ticket and even wins. His campaign is funded by same Lord Ali, who has been splashing money on Starmer. I would expect this in a third world corrupt country, but for those politicians to push the UK into this quagmire is truly shocking. Starmer is not alone in this mess. His education secretary accepted thousands of pounds of donation from same Lord Ali to organize her not one but two 40th birthday parties. Even after being caught, she has no remorse or shame and continues to justify her decision.
Your declaration showed that you received £14,000 from the Labour donor Lord Ali last year. What for exactly?
Yep, so I received that money from Wahid Ali, who's a long-standing Labour peer. It was used to fund two events, all of which was declared properly and thoroughly. That's why that information is in the public domain. The first event was ahead of my birthday, so I was turning 40. I thought it was a good opportunity to get people together in a professional context. So it was journalists, trade unionists, education people, MPs and shadow cabinet. The second event was an event that I held also again for lobby journalists, for people in the education world, as part of a reception. That's, you know, it was in a work context, you know.
That's a very nice thing, but if a Tory had done that 2 years ago, I know exactly what you'd be saying to me this morning. They should pay for their own birthday parties.
Look, this was in a work context. I didn't even invite my own...
You just said the same thing.
Yeah,
Come on.
I didn't even... My own family didn't come to that. It was in a work context. I celebrated my actual 40th birthday with my family. We went for a pizza. I celebrated with my kids. This was where I got together colleagues, journalists actually, trade unionists, education people. It was in a very different kind of context. Wahid is a Labour peer. He's been a Labour peer for over 25 years. This is fully transparent. Honestly,
with respect, I think we might be digging a slightly bigger hole here. You've got a lot of people who knew you might be the education secretary, and you've got them in a room. You're paying for them to lobby you. I mean, the point about all of this is that to the average viewer, it feels dodgy. It feels like this is now an event for lobbyists.
No, that's absolutely not what it was. This was an opportunity for people to come together to have a reception where we can talk about, for example, issues around education. These kinds of things happen regularly. It was all declared in line with the rules and fully transparent. This was two events in a work context, and the information is there for the public to see.
Then we have this so-called working class deputy PM, Angela Rayner. The Sunday Times reported that Rayner had stayed in the New York flat of same Lord Ali with Sam Turry, who was then Labour MP from Ilford South, last December. Now, we all are middle class people, right? Can you think of a middle class person being able to afford an apartment stay in New York? I can't. This is the new face of working class politicians in the Labour Party.
During the election campaign and then outside Downing Street, Keir Starmer said time and again, we will return politics to the service of the people. What part of returning politics to the service of the people involves accepting free outfits?
Well, first of all, MPs have accepted donations and gifts for years. All MPs do it. And what we talked about is making sure that we're open and transparent about that. And that was why the Prime Minister made sure that he corrected the record when he was advised that he needed to do that. He actively pursued that and took that advice, and I think that's the right thing to do. And we want to make sure that the government are transparent. But gifts and donations have been a factor in our political life for some time. We could have a debate about that. You know, I was from a very working class background. To stand as deputy leader, as you say, to get that position, I had to accept donations in order for me to run the campaign, because it's a very expensive way of doing our politics. And what Keir was saying, in particular around some of the donations that so he could see the football and security, is that shouldn't land on taxpayers. We're very clear on that, but we have to have transparency in the system.
But the rules are the rules. The perception is a different thing. What part of returning politics to the service of the people involved you accepting a free stay in a New York apartment on a holiday?
Well, first of all, I was on holiday in New York. I paid for my holiday in New York. But as friends do, a friend allowed me to stay. I often allow people to stay at mine. But what I felt, and I went beyond the rules, is because that person had donated to my deputy leadership, who happens to be a friend but is a politician in their own right, I felt I should declare it, and I did declare it.
But you were accepting accommodation from a wealthy Labour donor, whether they were a friend or not. What part of that do you think looks acceptable to people watching this morning?
I think the important thing is, you know, somebody allowed me to stay at their apartment for a few days. I decided to declare that because that person is a politician, happens to be a friend, and I stayed there for a couple of days. I felt it was important that people knew that I'd used the apartment. I don't think that's unusual.
Even Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, whose financial decisions will have crippling effect and is already having on the country's population, is not untouched by this scandal. She too has admitted that she received £7,500 to buy clothes from Juliet Rosenfeld since 2023. Juliet's husband was a known Labour donor before he died of cancer. The reason why we have problems in these politicians accepting such freebies is that they took a moral high ground on impropriety in public office when they were in opposition. There is also an issue that their action will give rise to more corruption in public office. There are already reports that the Labour has begun making political appointments in civil service jobs. These appointments are of those people who donated to Labour Party in the past. I doubt with these revelations, Starmer can enjoy the same credibility that he once enjoyed before becoming the PM. His reputation as a warmonger and known sponsor of Israeli genocide in Gaza is well known. Now he is being labelled as a potentially corrupt politician also. Only time will tell if he is able to redeem himself from this mess. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform on buymecoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that this platform is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.